Welcome to What's the Story Dublin, the official Dublin City Council podcast with me, your host, Deirdre Malumby. This podcast deep dives into the work of all the moving parts that make up Dublin City Council. It also shares news of the Council's latest initiatives and exciting events. In today's episode, we're looking at the role of the Chief Executive of Dublin City Council. I am delighted to be joined today by Dublin City Council's Chief Executive, Richard Shakespeare. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on What's the Story Dublin.
Delighted to be here, Deirdre. Delighted to be here and share whatever little morsels of wisdom I can bring to the conversation.
Absolutely, we can't wait to hear it. Richard, I was wondering if you could begin by telling us about the career path that ultimately led you to your role as Chief Executive.
Okay, I'll go right the way back. So I graduated in 1987 with a degree in horticulture from UCD. And then I was on that lovely road to London as jobs were hen's teeth here. And I came back then to open a sterling bank account in the Bank of Ireland in Belfield. And I ran into a former lecturer and he was asking me what was I doing? And I says, listen, I've got a job in London. I just opened a sterling bank account. And he says, what do you want to work for that wagon Thatcher for? And I said, well, there's not a lot here. He says, I have a great master's for you. So I ended up doing a master's in engineering. Mm-hmm. And coming towards the end of that, I was asked by my former professor in horticulture, would I apply for a job with Dublin County Council as it was at the time? And I was there going, okay, yeah, fine, fair enough, I'll give that a go. And I was interviewed on a Friday after lunch. The interview board had forgotten that it was supposed to be before lunch. And so I went in with sort of a little bit of credit and then finished the interview. And by the time I got home, my father told me he'd accepted the job on my behalf. So that began. So that was July 1990. I was just back from my honeymoon. So worked in parks, largely on development control stuff, so the planning piece in terms of parks. So I was assessing every planning permission that was coming in for the county south of the Liffey. And then in 1993, 94, there was the abolition of Dublin County and it was split into Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, South Dublin and Fingal, and I opted, because I lived out in Dean's Grange, to go for Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. Or at the time it was in Rathfarnham actually, but it was the closest place. And it was a combination of the old borough of Dún Laoghaire, the Dean's Grange Joint Burial Board, and the Rathdown Committee of Dublin County Council. So there was quite a lot at play in terms of culture. And it was at a time, I suppose, when whilst Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown now would have a very strong balance sheet and would probably have a modest surplus every year. Back then, it had a 17 million euro deficit in its revenue budget, and it didn't have a capital budget to talk about. So I was doing more of the same in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, and then I was also seconded on a part-time basis to Kildare County Council to landscape the motorways that go through. So all the trees that you see travelling out through Leixlip, Maynooth, Kilcock and Newbridge, Naas, Kilcullen, I was the one that would have designed and managed the planting of probably in excess of 2 million trees at the time. And then on top of that, I was doing the day-to-day stuff in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. And then probably in 97, I got an acting upgrade to do, if I can remember the title of the project, a European funded project called The Sustainable Recreational Use of Natural Assets. Really rolls off the tongue, that one. And that was all about, so I ended up managing Marley Park as the jewel in the crown in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown and about 400 acres of public open space. So that was the day-to-day management and stuff like that. But as usual, I had no money to spend on anything. And so you then had to get creative. And like it was at a time when you were asking council or asking residents associations to pay 50% of the cost of planting a street tree, which seems bizarre now. But back then, there wasn't the money to do it. So in 1999, we used to do these family fun days with FM 104, the Monster Day Out, and you had 40,000 people showing up to these things. And so I was leaning over a stillage of scaffolding, talking to the fellow who was organising. I said, "Do you think we could make money here in terms of commercial concerts?" And he went, "Yeah." So that begat Marley Park Concerts, which started in 2001. Which then, I suppose, now it's probably generating more than $1 million a year. And an awful lot of the funding raised over the years when I was there went back into Marley Park and the local area. So the locals, there was tremendous buy-in. And then the local sports clubs, Ballantyre St. John's and Broadford Rovers, do, I won't call it security, but they do stewarding. And basically standing at the front of houses, stopping people going in to relieve themselves. But they're then getting $5,000 a night. A lot of, so on a good year, they'll make 35, 40 grand, which is a lot of money for a sports club. So again, the virtuous nature of it. And then, so I developed a bit of a reputation then for making money. And the county manager at the time, a fellow called Derek Brady, formerly of the city council, going way back on when it was the corporation, he said, you're too valuable to be in there doing that parky stuff. I want you to come over to the dark side of administration. So I moved then as part of the Better Local Government Act in 2001, and I moved over as senior executive officer with responsibility for all matters cultural and graveyards, all lovely little bits and pieces thrown in. It was basically everything that nobody else wanted, and it was landed in this department. And at the time, I had no director or executive manager, so I was effectively doing that job. Excuse me. And, it was the sort of the variety there that really got the brain going, and then, 6-7 years later, I would think it was probably the last director in the door before the shutters came down and austerity hit, and the downsizing of local government, and so I was doing that in various different roles with Owen Keegan, and then latterly Philomena Poole was the last chief executive I worked for out there. And then in 2016, I threw my hat into the ring to come into the city council. Change is as good as a rest. Come into what the largest local authority in the state. A little bit intimidating, working in an area I'd never really worked in before, which was, the administrative side of planning, and coming into sort of like the development plan review and all of those things. But then also Owen gave me the lovely gift of what was CRES and now C-Class. And so, it did, got a development plan over the line, got a lot of capital stuff done out in Dunleary. That was good crack. And then I got the silver medal when I applied for Dunleary Rathdown's chief executive in 2021. And then I sort of said, well, I'm here now, so we'll give it a good go. And focused from that point on in getting the job that I now have. So I hope that is not too long-winded a version of how I got to where I got to. But an awful lot of it's down to luck, and also encouragement, mentoring, the people who've called you aside and sort of said, maybe you need to tone it down here, or did you think of doing it this way or that way? So all of those things, help build you. And throughout all of that time, I suppose the one constant was UCD Soccer Club. So I've played badly, coached moderately, and administered the club now as the club secretary. So I've about 45 years involved there. But, in terms of managing players and trying to get a team to perform, I suppose I probably learned more about the management side of things from that. Okay, yeah, you've done the training courses, you've done the leadership stuff, and you've done all of that. But you might say I draw more into my time as coaching a semi-professional football team than necessarily a lot of it. But you're the sum of your parts, all the learnings that come in, you can't really tell, what's really influenced you in terms of your style. And I would probably have, probably a slightly more relaxed style than others in my position, which I think stands to me, in that I've always prided myself on being very open to people knocking on the door, coming in for a chat. Doesn't have to be, if the door, my attitude is my door is open and you can get by Jenny, you're more than welcome to come in, for a chat.
Brilliant. And that's really interesting actually about your career trajectory, because I suppose naturally when we all look back on how we got to where we are, we think about the roads not taken. But at the same time for you, it sounds like it has been quite a linear path. You put in the work and you put in the time to get to where you are. Yeah,
but I suppose a little bit lacking in structure. I look at my kids and their North Star and doing this. And, back in the day when jobs were like hen's teeth, and then it kind of grows on you, and people say, oh, you get institutionalized. No, you actually get used to the rhythm and cadence of an organisation, and that, by bringing a different energy to it, you can impact and uplift everybody around you. And then if that sort of goes out, and hence the sort of one council, one team theme is that, we're all in this together. None of us, I haven't come across very many people in local government that are sort of vainglorious. There's an inner thing of doing the right thing for the right reason. And it just happens that, I firmly believe in local government, and it's the services that are closest to the citizen. And now a lot of people don't know what we do, which is a shame. That's more a reflection on us than them. But then in times of crisis, they lean into the first, port of call. Well, that's the local council's job, be it housing, be it a storm event, be it an ambulance or a fire engine, be it a tree down, the parks. And then when you start threading it all together, what a wonderful, wonderful place local government is in terms of the services that we deliver. So you might say, yeah, I came for the job and stayed for the vocation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you might say, I know the only advice I give you, if you're not enjoying something, change. If you feel yourself getting stale, change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's just the way I've treated it over the years. After doing 11 years as a park superintendent, yeah, it was kind of like itchy.
And our hope with What's the Story Dublin is to kind of articulate those services and the work that we do at Dublin City Council and how we work for the city and everything. But just looking at kind of our next topic, Richard, it's interesting there that you touched on one council, one team, because I know that and getting back to basics have been a couple of your focuses as chief executive. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the motivations behind those themes, because one of the things that struck me when you were kind of talking about your background in parks and landscaping and stuff like that, would part of that have been kind of the inspiration behind those themes?
Yeah, I suppose, and I suppose it's the presentation of the public realm, which is what we're responsible for. Yeah. From building to building, that's us. And from my perspective, I like to look at it from the point of view of your average citizen. What do you want to see? So put yourself, we all consume local government services. Mm-hmm. So what would you like to see when you walk outside your front door? Do you want to see a dirty street, broken trees, vandalised playground, footpaths not broken, lights not working? No. So they're the very basics. And if we want to be a trusted organisation, across the board to be considered capable of delivering, the large capital programme that we have, you really need to get back to basics, because that's where you build trust. You build trust with the elected members. And, and then the one thing that always worked for me throughout my career, when I was out in Dunleary in particular with the area committees, I'd always go half an hour, 3/4 an hour before the meeting. And you'd get a sense of what the mood was. And also, they'll ask you for favours or things over the cup of tea that they wouldn't ask at a meeting. And so that's how you build relationships with the elected members. And now you've got to try to bring that above the transactional. But you have to engage in the transactional stuff with the elected members to get them to engage on a more strategic level and the big capital stuff that needs to be done, and sometimes the hard decisions. So, yeah, I mean, it is. I all the time look at it from, do I like what I'm seeing as a citizen, not as the chief executive or the director of service or whatever else. As a citizen, do I like what I see? And then the one thing I didn't like. And I used to give Dick Brady absolute brain damage, who used to be head of environment and transportation. I'd be taking photographs and, of litter strewn on the streets and all the bits and pieces, because it just bothered me that that sends out a message about our values. And my thing is that the standard you walk by is the standard you've set. And so it doesn't matter whether it's somebody playing Tetris on their phone while they're clocked in. If that's not challenged, that becomes accepted behaviour. And likewise, if we accept dirty streets, that begets a whole lot of other social problems. And, a cared for place and a well-tended place tends to attract less antisocial activity.
And we're all about kind of getting back to basics here on What's the Story Dublin. So my next question for you is, what does a chief executive actually do? What are you responsible for?
Well, okay, you can look at it in the macro sense that, yeah, I have a staff of 6,500, but it really is about energising people to do it. And one of the key leadership strengths is performance through people. So there's a bit of trust involved in that, in terms of, and that's where, you get the delegated authority down to the assistant chief executives and then down to the executive managers and the SEOs. And the further down you can drive that in terms of responsibility and people owning it, the better. And that's not to say that I just delegate and walk away. No, I have my one-to-ones, and kind
of the empowerment piece.
Yeah, I mean, because if people, there's no point in asking somebody to be, take responsibility for something if you don't expect them to be accountable for the same thing. Mm-hmm. So it is that bit there around the accountability piece, and so it's really about getting things done, and with the elected members. You know what I mean? And they, and some people look at them as a necessary evil. They're vital to the functioning of democracy, purely and simply because they have a mandate. They're elected, we're appointed. And you really need to respect that. It's no mean thing to put yourself in front of an electorate on a platform and get elected. And they have a mandate to try to get things done. And luckily for me, that the vision I set out when I was being appointed largely aligns with, you might say, what the elected members want to see. And that was a return to basics. But again, the other bit there is that my job was also to chase the money. So luckily, in fairness to the elected members this year, the LPT, it's gone to the baseline. But I asked them to tell me what they wanted to spend the 16.3 million on. And so that's where the split in terms of stuff going into housing maintenance, into roads, into areas that matter to them. And so they have ownership of it. And they can actually turn around and say, well, actually, there's where your LPT went. And we need to get better at articulating where money is spent and where it comes from. You know what I mean? And it's so from that perspective, it is on us as management and, you know, the overall staff to let people know you'd love to be going around sticking your LPT paid for this on different things. You know what I mean? And be it the new Jetfax or the new street cleaning machinery, there should be something on it, your LPT paid for this. You know, because that's, you've got to make what we do relatable to it. And by making it relatable then, we are accountable. You know, we're entrusted this year now, as of Monday night, with a 1.7 billion euro budget. You know, which is, you know, a lot of bits and pieces add up to it. But we need to constantly, you know, be accountable for how we spend that money. You know what I mean? And that be it at area committee meetings or at council meetings. And, you know, the senior team know all about that. We had a slightly different approach to the budget meeting this year. And it will evolve again, just in terms of the level of detail the elected members get. Because when they're voting on a 1.7 billion euro budget, they're entitled to know where the money comes from and where it's going to be spent.
Absolutely.
So in a nutshell, get stuff done.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Richard, what would a typical day in your job look like? If there is a typical day. No, that's always
Yeah, I mean, listen, again, a lot of it is meeting, you know, all sorts of stakeholders. And, you know, being visible. You know what I mean? So I'd be a bit of a corridor crawler in terms of, you know, a lot of my predecessors wouldn't have gone to the canteen. I'll generally eat in the canteen, or I'll get it in the canteen and back up to the office, all depending on what's going on. But, you know, you meet banks, you meet the chambers of commerce. I mean, at a very entertaining, you know, session with the Dublin Chamber of Commerce. And I was introduced in a particular way that, like, you know, difficulty keeping all the stakeholders happy. And so I said, yeah, I'm in the disappointment business. You know what I mean? And so it's a good quip, but like you are trying to manage. And so I always liken it to, if you know the old circus act spinning plates or a juggler and trying to keep 27 balls in the air at once without letting anything drop. And that's, I suppose, you know, no two days are the same. You know, it's like I chaired today, like I was chairing the board of the local government management agency. Before that, I met a crowd of property investors. After that, I was signing a contract. Following that, I came over here. You know, so it does vary quite a bit day to day, but that's what makes it interesting. No 2 days are the same. So I couldn't say that the work is monotonous or repetitive, because it's not. It's quite dynamic and it shifts. And one of the skills is to be agile enough to know what is really important, because I get invited to everything, but attend very little. I'm quite choosy in what I go to. So from that perspective, it is, yeah, I mean, that's one of the real kicks of the game, is the variety.
And the busyness.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, you know, if you're, you know, the busier you are, the better, but you don't want to be stupid busy either, because you need time to think.
Absolutely.
You know, that I don't like going to bed with problems in my head.
And since becoming chief executive in December 2023, Richard, what have been some of the big challenges that you've had to face and overcome?
Well, I suppose you figure out, between the first interview and the second interview, the Dublin riot happened. Okay, and like, talk about a national focus on something. So in fairness, leaned heavily into the waste management team, and they were chomping at the bit to get in. And so that'd be one of my proudest moments, albeit I was the interim chief executive, is to see that, like, when the chips are really down and we're in a crisis, city and county councils across the country really come into their own. We're well prepared, we know what to do, and that's from the GO, through the supervisors, through the inspectors, right the way up the food chain. And, you know, people really do go above and beyond And that's, so, and then like other highlights would be, getting the market started here in the Victorian Fruit and Vegetable Market there from Mary's Lane. And that's something that I sort of started with in 2018. But it goes to show how long it takes to get a big capital project up and running. And in fairness to Siobhan Marr, she stayed with it all the time. Tony Flynn gave it a little bit of extra juice. And now we're on site with Purcell's, who did a great job down in the Water Activity Centre, down in the Docklands. So all of those things. But even the simple stuff like Liffey Street, pedestrianisation of Parliament Street, the chance we have in terms of Dame Street, College Green, you look at the potential. And the things you want to get going are the new Central Library, which is a big ask financially, but I think a well worth one. We spoke, before coming on air as such about the benefit of libraries and cultural space, and that's going to be on steroids for the city. You know what I mean? And when you look at the one I was involved in out in Dunleary, that now attracts thousands of people a day, largely students, which is great to see. And that even in this sort of digital age, you'll see kids pottering around, adults researching things, leaving cert students, junior cert students. And that's throughout. You even look at where we are here today. Places full of kids studying, doing their homework, doing stuff like that. So they're I suppose, the little things that would really make a difference. And then just the public realm enhancements like Francis Street, Liffey Street, the stuff that doesn't necessarily, there's no big fanfare about. But like Chatham Street is now a lovely street. You know what I mean? Where it's a bit broken down and dilapidated. So we're now working on Duke Street and South Anne Street. And so it just, the more we can improve the urban fabric. And the other great thing was then I suppose, the Taoiseach's task force. And, in fairness to Carl Mitchell, he represented us very well on that. And put in a lot of stuff. We now have the 10 big moves. And we're getting very close to establishing a special purpose vehicle that will make it more agile to develop stuff and look at, some of the real root causes of urban regeneration or the urban dereliction. And that is trying to get people back into the city, living over the shop. And sometimes we'll need to go in and CPO a row of units to deliver whatever on the ground floor, but people living above it to make it sort of, I won't even say economically viable, but socially sustainable.
Brilliant. So Richard, what do you love most about your job?
It's probably the variety. It's and the complexity as well, and trying to make complex things simpler, and working with people. I mean, I don't work from home because I enjoy people too much. Not that I don't like my family, but you might say the cut and thrust of daily activity in the civic offices is great. It's good for the brain. It keeps you going. You can have a bit of a laugh. And, the most important thing is that, sometimes in really hard situations, if you can see the funny side of things or look at things, it could be worse, it is quite energising. You know what I mean? So I think the variety and the fact then that I'm lucky to be based in the civic offices at the centre of things is what I knock a kick out of. And just to chit chat with people in the office about how their kid is doing or doing stuff like that, because you always need to make time for that stuff. And I think we've lost that to an extent in a lot of areas with the remote working. And I'm not saying I'm going changing anything with remote working, but I'm just sort of saying from where I'm looking at it, I think the people who possibly do remote working quite a lot are possibly missing out on some of the social benefits of being office based.
Absolutely. It really does come down to the people at the end of the day. My next question for you is, for those aspiring to be in a role like yours one day, what do you think, Richard, are the key qualities you need to be an effective chief executive?
I suppose spotting opportunities. Don't be afraid to delegate, to ask others' opinion, not to be afraid of somebody's saying to you, no, don't be afraid. Don't worry about disagreement. I think it's very important and healthy that just because I'm the chief executive or an executive manager doesn't give me the monopoly on the right opinion or the right way of doing anything. But also, perseverance. You know what I mean? That is, that type of perseverance, resilience, that, it's not how often you get knocked down, it's how quick you bounce back up, really, you know what I mean? And we've all had career setbacks. We all haven't got a job that we really wanted. And then it's just a case of dust yourself down. I'm not going to say suck it up, process it, deal with it, but then constantly move forward. You know what I mean? That it, don't stop looking in the rear view mirror, look at the road ahead. And, engage with others, find a mentor or mentor somebody. We have this program now that's been run out through the Learning and Development Unit. And I'd suggest to anybody to sign up to do that mentorship program, because you learn quite a bit about yourself, and the ability to, in terms of how to mentor somebody, and that how to be mentored. You know what I mean? So there is, and just be positive. Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, you can go around with the hangdog face all you want. It doesn't really get you anywhere. And you tend to attract then people of a miserable disposition around you. And that's not what it's about. You want the positivity and energy that people bring, and particularly young people who have a different thought process nowadays to what I had. And I'm looking at some of the younger staff and I'm going, geez, don't know. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like how quick they are to do things. And I'm there, doing one finger at a time. I'm wondering what happens if I press this button. I absolutely believe in the technology, but you shouldn't be a slave to it. I think, if I had my way, people going down to the canteen should be forced to leave their phones on their desk. Just engage with people, have a bit of crack and stop, the Instagram post or whatever, the likes and all of this type of stuff. Life is too short. Live it in person as opposed to online. So, and the one thing I've always said to people going for interview, be enthusiastic. If you give off a positive vibe and are enthusiastic about the role, by and large, interview boards react positively to that. And anybody does. Like, so when you're, and it's you've also got to be authentic about it. It can't just be for the sake of an interview. You either have that in you or you don't. And if you don't, you can train, and just kind of retraining the brain to be positively disposed to things as opposed to going, And I'd like to see myself more as a why not than a why person. And you'll encounter throughout life the why people. Avoid them to a large extent. The why nots are where you want to be. Sure, give it a go. And, from that perspective, it was very easy for me when I came up with the concerts for Marley Park, for the county manager at the time to say no. But I chose my moment, and he says, yeah, give it a crack. Why not? You know what I mean? So that really has stuck with me. So try to attach. And yeah, you do need the little canary in the coal mine every now and again going, well, I don't know about this, lads. Because you can fall into that group, think that, geez, we're all great. And then bang, and what's gone on here, So, but it is that positive disposition, I would say, would be a key quality.
Brilliant. I think that's some excellent career advice, no matter what kind of role you're pursuing. So thank you so much for that. I think we have time for just a couple of more questions, Richard. So I suppose one of my last ones was, we've kind of looked at past, present and future now. What are you looking to do next in your capacity as Chief Executive, looking to the future?
Well, I suppose it's all around harnessing AI and, to get rid of some of the rote stuff that we expect staff to do, because that can be mind-numbingly boring. And it's not about reducing staff, it's about maybe putting them in more front-facing roles. So that digital transition that was started by Eileen and now being carried through by Aidan, I think is an exciting journey, and we just need to manage how we do it, and that, again, we're not a slave to it. It's there to help us and to free up resources to do other things that we might like to do. This whole, really embed the councillor portal and the citizen portal, where we can enable our staff who are on the ground delivering a service to sort of put up a photograph, and it automatically just goes back, and like the grass is cut or the tree is fixed or the light is fixed, the footpath's fixed. The simple little things, because a lot of the time people put in a thing and nothing happens. And then they come back one day and it's done, and they're wondering, well, geez, who did that? So it is trying to, I suppose, also trying to promote what we do, and that we are a vital public service, probably the most vital public service that people will encounter. And invariably, a lot of the time, they encounter us on possibly their worst day. You know what I mean? That, and we need to be compassionate, sympathetic, and recognise that we're there to serve the public. And so from that perspective, I think, that type of transition, I would really like to see the waste management stuff permeate out to the 31 towns and villages a little bit more, that we deliver a better service. And again, it's those basic things. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying to get the Central Library over the line, looking forward to Dalymount. So we're in the ground, as said, in the fruit and vegetable market. Look forward to that being over the line. And I'll be a passionate advocate for a tourist accommodation tax, because I think that can, again, financially empower us. And so I'm part of my vision was trying to create a sustainable funding base. And, we've very few levers as a sector that we can do. You've got the rents, which, in fairness to the councillors, they were brave enough to raise them for the first time in 30 years, or to have a look at the scheme. I think that was a very good day's work by Frank Darcy, Richard Whelan, and Mick Mulhern, and the finance team, and the two SPCs. So it's incremental stuff, and then yet punctuated with, really solid projects that will rejuvenate and revitalise not just the city centre, because we can totally focus on the city centre and forget about outside. And then, stuff I really enjoy, I really should have run away with the circus, is what Tony Smithers is doing in the event side of things. You know what I mean? I'd have loved to have done that for a living. But it's a hard graft. So we see the end product. We don't really see all the effort and work that goes in behind the scenes. And looking forward to delivering a very positive Euro 2028, which I hope Ireland will be in as of right, and not need anything, not need help from the get out of jail clause.
And I know you touched on probably a lot of them there, Richard, but would you have any other hopes for next steps for Dublin City Council?
As an organisation, I would like to hope in the next year or two we will be fully digitally enabled in terms of all of our staff. There's a bit of a digital divide going on there, and it's a case of how we can roll that out appropriately, and the era of smart technology, but also the data that we can gain and the learnings and insights we can get from the data we collect. But I'd like to see the organisation continue to grow and get a little bit of its swagger back, because it was kind of downtrodden in terms of its morale. Hopefully I've improved that a little bit, but you'd like to see that continued growth until somebody says stop. But I think we're getting more recognised now by central government, and that, we need to really hammer home the housing challenge. And, in fairness to Mick Mulhern, there's going to be a bit of restructuring there in how we do things to deliver on our targets. And you figure out, between next year, this year and next year, we'll probably deliver 4,000 units across a lot of our delivery streams and with our partners. So from that perspective, that is goal number one, is to deliver more social and affordable cost rental housing to meet the increasing demands, because the city is growing at an incredible rate. And we, at the moment, we're kind of sprinting to stand still. But that, a lot of it is because the state has underinvested in not just Dublin City Council, but the sector. But, Dublin, the wider Dublin region, is responsible for 54% of GDP. And, I believe we should be entitled to get a little bit more of the taxation that is generated in Dublin, to be spent in Dublin.
And any final word on either your role or our role as a council, or just anything you'd like the listeners to know as we wrap?
I think, let's just go in to 2026 with an air of positivity and not be afraid to tackle challenges. Don't put off what you could do today to tomorrow just because it might be a thorny or knotty little issue. And there's always support. There's people there to help and encourage. And you know what? Challenge yourself in 2026 to avail of training opportunities, because a better trained, I won't say educated, but a better trained organisation will optimise its performance in the long run. And it'll also keep people engaged, because, it is lifelong learning. You know what I mean? I did a leadership course there, and people are saying, well, why do you want to do a leadership course? Because it was going to deliver more for the organisation than just me. And so I'm sort of, you might say, my how would you put it? My future is behind me to a certain extent. And I just need to make the most of the next 5 years to try to grow the organisation, improve the lot of the citizens of Dublin, and hopefully people will look back kindly in 2030 that, I made a bit of a difference. But I'm only able to make that difference with the help of the 6,500 colleagues that work with me.
I think that's the perfect note to leave it on. Thank you so much, Richard, for taking time out of your very busy schedule. We appreciate to speak with us today. So thank you so much for
Not at all, dear. Delighted to be here.
And thanks again to today's guest, Chief Executive of Dublin City Council, Richard Shakespeare. I'd also like to extend my thanks to our audio engineer and editor, Robert Fay. This podcast was produced by myself, Deirdre Malumbi, and Michael Ryan, and recorded in the Central Library Studio. Be sure to spread the word if you're enjoying What's the Story Dublin, and to like and subscribe for future episodes. Slán go fóill.